Yeah, started on that movie about killing animals. There's I don't know, there might be a bounty on them, but yeah, there's lots of they get in and kill like young kids. There's something over used to feel safe. Now, oh, it's you could probably find someone to sell. This close to Texas. Want to summon the troops, or is this the troops?
This might be the troops.
You calling the troops, is that it?
Didn't say that.
Dang, he got hard of hearing since he got married.
What? Let's open up with acknowledging with prayer for thanks for being filled. As Devarim chapter 8 verse 10 tells us, we have eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen. What was so funny? What was so funny?
Oh, well,
Can't remember. No, what happened?
So this is the last Torah portion of the calendar year. Next week will be 2021, and it'll be,
It's the last portion?
I think it's for Vayigash, which is the last portion of Bereshit. So we open up the scroll of Shemot after that.
What's next week's called?
Vayigash, and he lived. But it picks up 47:28, goes into the book of Bereshit and Genesis. Yeah, exactly. That's right. So our Midrash is on this chapter, as well as the Haftorah and Yochanan or John chapter 5. So how many mitzvot are in this portion? A, B, C, or D? It's none. Because the next one is not until Torah portion Bo, which I think is the third portion of Shemot. Because it's Bo is the second portion, and no, it's the second portion, as it was, the second portion. No, it's a third, because it's Shemot, and then Va'era, and then Bo. So it's the third portion of Bereshit. So this video is, if it plays, it's not from 119 Ministries, but it's a congregation in South Dallas area called Bnei Avraham, the Messianic congregation, and they have a video entitled Vayigash, Reconciliation Between Yeshua and the Jewish People. So I'll watch that one first.
Vayigash. In the Torah portion of Vayigash, there are numerous connections to the Messiah. Yehudah, drawing near to Yosef in the beginning of this Torah portion, points towards the end times and the joining of the kingdoms of Ephraim and Yehudah. Yehudah, putting his life on the line for his brother Benjamin, points towards the Messiah. And Yosef, finally revealing himself to his brothers, points towards the eventual reconciliation between Yeshua and the Jewish people. The beginning of this Torah portion in Genesis 44 verse 18 says, "Then Yehudah came near unto him, This text hints towards the eventual drawing near of Messiah, son of Yehudah, to Messiah, son of Yosef. Amos 9, verse 13, points toward this event. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes, him that soweth seed. The Midrash states that the plowman and the treader of grapes point towards Yehudah and the Messiah, son of David, while the reaper and the sower of seed point towards Yosef and the Messiah, son of Yosef. In the Messianic era, Yehudah will overtake Yosef, and the Messiah will ultimately come from Yehudah. This points towards the unification of Yehudah and Yosef in the time to come. As it says in the Midrash and Hasidic Jewish commentary, Yachut Moshiach, Yehudah drew near to Yosef so that no air can be between them. The deeds of the fathers are portents for the sons. Likewise, the deeds of Yehudah and Yosef anticipated the deeds of King Rehoboam from the tribe of Yehudah and King Jeroboam from the tribe of Yosef. But the secret meaning of the passage that is there will be peace between Messiah, son of Yosef, and Messiah, son of David. The Haftorah portion for Parashat Vayigash is in the same vein of unity between Yehudah and Yosef. The prophecy in Ezekiel depicts two sticks, one for Yehudah and one for Yosef. The two sticks are combined, pointing towards not only the unification of Yehudah and Yosef, but also the two messiahs being combined into one Messiah. The next prophecy in Ezekiel 37 verse 24 says, "And my servant David shall be king over them, and they shall have one shepherd." A single king from the house of David, representing both messiahs, will rule over the united kingdoms of Yehudah and Yosef, like a shepherd watching over his flock. We believe that this is Yeshua of Nazareth, from whom both the suffering Messiah, son of Yosef, and the victorious Messiah, son of David, are joined together. Yehudah offered to give his life for the life of his brother Benjamin. He would rather be a slave for the rest of his life in the land of Mitzrayim than let his father suffer again. When Yosef saw what Yehudah wanted, he knew that his brothers who had repented, they had passed the test, and Yosef no longer had any reason to hide from them. God has hidden Yeshua from the Jewish people in a similar way in order to test them and bring them to repent. We who believe in Yeshua should not be disheartened that the majority of the Jewish people do not know Yeshua. We must remember that God has not abandoned his people. We must remember that God is always at work with his people. It is just as it says in Romans 11 verse 25, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And when the time is right, it will be just as it says in Romans 11 verse 26 through 27. All Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away from ungodliness from Yaakov. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. In Genesis 45 verse 1 it says, Then Yosef could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. And he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Yosef made himself known to his brethren. Yosef stood before his brothers, revealing that he had been the one who sustained them through the famine, that he had been the one who tested them, that he had been the one who'd been with them all along. In this same way, Yeshua would reveal himself to his people in the future. Christian missionary efforts towards the Jewish people have not been nearly as successful as the efforts toward other nations and religions. The Jewish people have good reason not to accept Yeshua in the way that Christianity presents it. But the real reason why the Jewish people have not yet recognized Yeshua as the Messiah is because he has not yet revealed himself to them. Yeshua conceals himself on purpose. Mary of Magdala did not recognize Yeshua until he spoke to her by name. The two Talmudim disciples on the way to Emmaus didn't recognize Yeshua until he made a blessing over the bread and disappeared before their eyes. On the shore of Galilee, Even his own Talmudim didn't recognize him for who he was. Romans 11, verse 25 through 26 points towards a time where Yeshua will be hidden from his people. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, There shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Before Yosef revealed his identity to his brothers, he cleared the Egyptians from the room. If we liken the brothers to the Jewish people, then the Egyptians are the Gentiles. When the time came for Yosef to show himself, he did not need to show the Egyptians. The Egyptians already knew who he was, and they were not needed in the situation. When Yeshua reveals himself to his people, he will not need the help of missionaries. Then it will be said, there was no man with him when Yeshua made himself known to his brothers. Vayigash has numerous connections to the Messiah. From the beginning of this Torah portion, where Yehudah draws near to his brother Yosef, to the middle, where Yehudah shows his willingness to lay down his life in freedom for his brother, and where Yosef decides to show himself as his family's savior, to the end in the Haftorah, where the Messiah, son of Yosef, and the Messiah, son of David, will be one in the time to come.
Any comments on the video before we kind of go to the Reverend Midrash? That was an interesting video. I liked it.
Yeah, good.
All right, so this is already in the commentary part, or the Midrash part. Here's a commentary from Art Scroll on chapter 44, verse 18, first verse or portion, where it is, and then Judah approaches. Commenting on that, it says, all the brothers were dumbfounded, but only Judah stepped forward, risking his life to intercede. His speech was simple yet eloquent, controlled yet emotional, respectful yet firm. Judah petitioned without debasing himself. He could not protest the fairness of the verdict because the goblet was found in Benjamin's sack. Instead, Judah offered himself as a slave, not realizing that he was speaking to the very person whom he had once sold into slavery. Hertz commentary, Hertz Pentateuch and Haftorah commentary, reads on the same passage, the spirit of self-sacrifice, which Judah's speech reveals, offered to remain as a slave in Benjamin's place, has its parallels in the life story of Moses, who besought God to blot out his name from the book of life unless his people Israel is saved with him. That's found in Exodus 32:32. So some of my comments, the Jews' approach to Joseph is true repentance. The question would be, did Jews' repentance redeem him, allow the Messiah's lineage to be traced through him? Since we know that it is, that may be in part what's happening there. Now, a couple of things on the number 4 in this context. Judah was the fourth born son. And if you look at the 1,000 years as a day construct of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, Messiah came on the fourth day of creation, of the years of creation. And the Aleph Tav is the fourth word of 7 words in Bereshit 1:1. Aleph Tav is the first and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, of course, and is the equivalent of the Greek Alpha and Omega. And you see it reads Bereshit bara Elohim et Hashemayim ve'et ha'aretz as the first words of the portion. And you see that the Aleph Tav there, the et, it doesn't have a translation. It has a grammatical form. It shows the sign of the direct object, indicating that Elohim is doing the creating, not being created. The direct object being the heavens and the earth. You see actually Aleph Tav in there twice, where it says Ve'et, that is also the Vav Aleph Tav. For Elohim was when he created the heavens and the earth. So The Aleph Tav is an interesting study. It may be more emphasized in Messianic circles than it deserves to be, but it's still a very interesting study in terms of what we see it in the beginning of everything here in Genesis 1. Now, JD talked a bit last week, we saw a video as well about the parallels between Joseph and Yeshua. Kind of a short summation. Joseph was sent from the mountain by his father, was rejected by his brethren, cast into the pit, sold for a price, falsely accused, and then raised up to the right hand of the king for the purpose of life, to preserve a remnant and for a great deliverance. Those all are for Joseph. They sound also a lot like what Yeshua did as well. Before I go on, any questions or comments on what we've read or talked about so far? (44, 27, 28). Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, surely he was torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. So Archibald's commentary, verse 27, it says, this passage was not recorded in the original account of Jacob's response in chapter 43, verses 6 and 7 of the book of Genesis. This is in keeping with the rule that the Torah is brief in one place and expansive in another, reserving detail for wherever they would be more pertinent. So, not everything, we sometimes think that there's a lot of repetition in the Torah, but a lot of times what we see is it's the same story but with different or more details, and that's what happened, what's going on. Chapter 44 versus the original Jacob's response in 43. Joseph and Benjamin wept. We see that in chapter 45 verses 14 and 15. Then he embraced his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept on them. After that, his brothers talked with him. So Joseph wept and Benjamin wept. When will Judah, Levi, and the other brothers weep?
When the Messiah returns.
I think that's a good response. We see it. The answer is in Jeremiah 31, in my view, which reads, behold, I am bringing them from the north country, and I will gather them from the remote parts of the earth, among them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and she who is in labor with child, together a great company, Kahal Gadol. They will return here. With weeping they will come, and by supplication I will lead them. I will make them walk by streams of water on a straight path on which they will not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. So Jeremiah 31 is more famous for another passage besides this one. What passage are you talking about there? The New Covenant is also in Jeremiah in a couple of verses later. So I think that the bringing Israel together, which does of course link to our Haftorah, is when the other brothers will all come, bringing them from the north country, wherever they've been scattered. A kahal gadol, a great company or a great congregation. Word kahal, of course, is the Hebrew word that's often translated in the Greek text of the Septuagint as ecclesia. The idea that the prophetic fulfillment of this week for joy, when all the tribes come back to the land as a chad, the great reunion, is not a messianic or two-house invention. This is the teaching of mainstream Judaism as contained in Midrash Rabbah. And if you'll notice today's Haftorah from Ezekiel 37, I am not making this up. So mainstream Judaism believes that same thing. This is not a two-house teaching, not a messianic invention, but it is mainstream Judaism. That's why we have, I think, Ezekiel 37 as a Haftorah. But also it is in the Midrash as well. Teaching of mainstream Judaism from the Midrash is in fact that this is when all the tribes come together with weeping they will come. Okay, so we've talked about this in some in the past, but if you add the names from the list, if you're in Genesis 46 and count all the number of the names listed there, it says the number adds up to 70 at the end of that listing in verse 27. But if you actually check it, you find that in fact there are only 69 people mentioned there. And so what does that mean? Well, a couple different viewpoints of what that means. Rashi says the missing person is Yocheved, who's Moshe's mother, who was born between the walls on the way to Egypt. So she's not counted here because she was still in the womb when this was going on. The other view, or at least another view, is Monty's that says the missing number is Adonai, since Genesis Bereshit 46 verse 4 says, I will go down to Egypt with you. Now, the weaknesses of both of those would be that Yocheved would be really, really old when Moshe is born, if that's the case.
400 years.
Or 210, depending on your view of how the math works out. But in any case, she's beyond normal child. She's beyond Sarah's age for giving birth. The second view of the problem with Monty's view is what?
I would just say God isn't a person.
Well, these are the descendants of Jacob being counted here, and since that's yeah, so a view not stated on here may be related to that, in that Paul in 1 Corinthians says that Messiah was the rock that was following them, so he may be the 70th person. He is, in genealogy at least, a descendant of Yaakov from the tribe of Judah.
Is the number for 70 taking into account Jacob himself one day?
No, it says, because here's what it says. It says in verse 26, it's part of the youth challenge. All the people belonging to Yaakov coming into Egypt, his direct descendants, not counting Yaakov's sons' wives, totaled 66. And then it goes to sons of Yosef, were 2 in number, thus all the people in Israel were 70. So there's 66 in Yosef and his 2 sons, only has 69 right there. So there's an issue somewhere along the way. There's not people in Jacob's town. I mean, you can make that could be one of the other cases that really it's not counting, the other numbers aren't counting Jacob. So that is.
That would be counted among the numbers of people in Egypt.
Yeah.
What about Joseph's
What about Joseph's
wife?
wife? Why?
When she didn't go down to Egypt, she was already there.
Yeah. And one thing, my studies, she was a daughter of the priest of On, but I don't think that's a god. That's a town, place. On is another word for Heliopolis in Egypt. So it's not a god, it's a city. So like priest of Lot would be an equivalent of saying that. Well, Heliopolis probably is better than that. Maybe priest of local city or something. Sure. I think. Well, that is one of the questions. She is sometimes counted in some rabbinic idea, I think, as Reuben's wife, or something like that. If I remember right.
Is it mentioned by him?
Well, yes, it's she's listed in verse 15. So she is counted in 46:15. These are the children of Leah, whom she bore to Yaakov and Padan Aram, with his daughter Dinah, and some his sons and daughters numbered 33. So she is counted in that list. So I'll leave it at that. It is a bit of a mystery. It's unsolved.
Is it possible they were just rounding up?
No, I don't think so. I think he went to all the trouble of listing them by name, so I think he meant to have them counted by name. But
Or is this one of those instances where someone's name was blotted out?
don't know if that'd be the case. But that's not the only issue here, because Stephen quotes 75 in the book of Acts. But it could partly, and it's possible this reason is because that's how the Septuagint reads for this passage as well. Here's the Septuagint text of Genesis 46. It says that Asenat, the daughter of Petrophas, priest of Heliopolis. So you get Heliopolis in the Septuagint, which is owned in the Greek, so it's the city. Bore to him even Manasseh and Ephraim. There are two sons born of Manasseh, with the Assyrian concubine bore to him Machir. Machir begot Galad, and sons of Ephraim, brother of Manasseh, Sulam and Tam, and sons of Sulam and Edom. So the Septuagint translation says there are 75 because it adds 3 grandsons and 2 great-grandsons of Joseph to the count. And unfortunately, in the Dead Sea Scrolls of this text, those cave worms are again being munching. Worms ate up that section. It's not actually in the wasn't there at Qumran. At least I haven't found it yet. But there are a couple of scrolls that show Exodus 1:5, which the Masoretic text reads 70, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls at those passages, 2 of them read 75. And so there are 2 different Hebrew readings in ancient times of this passage in terms of 70 versus 75.
Doesn't that, so you're saying it adds 5 more people besides the 69?
Yes, it adds their 3 grandsons and 2 great-grandsons of Joseph. At least in this. See, the Septuagint reads that way. The Dead Sea Scrolls just says it's 75 there, at least what's in the text. Doesn't list them, the grandsons, by name. So what's going on there? The Greek and Aramaic versions of the book of Acts 7:13 both read 75. So, and some believe that Stephen's source was the Masoretic text plus Jacob, Zilpah, Bela, and Leah, and Messiah. So 70 of those came from the loins of Jacob. But he could be using the Septuagint, or he may be reading from the other Hebrew tradition that we see from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's not necessarily limited to Stephen reading from a Greek text to get 75. He may be reading from the Hebrew text from which the 75 was counted from, so to speak. I'm thinking that the Septuagint didn't just translate 75 on its own without the source document, and we see that Qumran has one that said 75, so they may have been using a Qumran type text to make part of that translation at least. So Stephen could well have been translating or recalling 75 not from the Septuagint, but from the other Hebrew textual tradition that we see at Qumran. So I know that Earl has some questions. Dixie has a question here. She says, when are the cookies going to be ready?
Yeah. Good question.
What's your question, Earl? What question?
Okay. I was taught that when Jacob and his people went down to Egypt, they were in the land of Goshen, that after a year they sold out all their money, then they gave up all their cattle or whatever, and then they ended up selling themselves into slavery. But as I read it, I don't see that. I don't see that happening at all.
Those are the people of Egypt that actually.
That's what I believe.
Yeah.
But I don't see how Israel could have given himself, because it states in 45:11, Yosef saying, "There I will provide for you. They steal your house and all you have come to poverty." And the other thing was Pharaoh wanted them to be shepherds for his own flock. So they're going to get paid. They're not doing it for free.
Well, I don't know. I think
The thing is it wasn't until much later that the Hebrews were put into slavery because they were afraid of it.
They were put into slavery. That's what I believe. So I'm just trying to figure out how.
it says the Pharaoh rose and did not yet know Joseph.
Yeah,
That's
where I'm trying to get from is, when he taught us that, I can't see where he got that. So if you see anything like that, can you share with me how it gets there? Other than I know that when the Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, they put him into slavery. That I got. Where I'm going from that is, I was taught that they put themselves into slavery because they sold everything they had and they didn't have nothing else, and therefore yada yada yada. And I'm like, I can't see that.
Well, it seems that I'll let you answer in a minute. I'm just gonna say that it seems that the reason they went to Goshen and had them, there's a reason behind him telling them, tell him you're shepherds.
Yes,
Because that way they'll be separate and the people will not become intermixed with the Egyptians. They'll
because the
be,
Egyptians didn't like shepherds.
they abhorred shepherds, yeah.
Yes.
So they,
But that's not where I was going with it. I was more, because that's what I was taught, well, they sold themselves into slavery. I can't see that, and I don't believe that. So I just want to know, am I correct or am I wrong? Or, am I going in the right direction in that?
well, I don't see it as being selling themselves into slavery, even though it says there's places where it says the only ones of the Egyptians that were not sold everything was the priests. They were not sold.
Isn't
But-
it after that that it?
But that was
that it actually
Egyptians.
specifically
But
mentioned?
I think those are Egyptians we're talking about,
Right.
and not the children of Israel.
Right. So my thought is, like Ben had said, I know that the Pharaoh that came up that did not know Joseph, they put them into slavery, so they were forced into slavery. They weren't
They didn't voluntarily sell themselves.
exactly for food because they were being paid.
Yeah, something I also noticed from that particular passage is, I'm thinking, it looks like, well, Joseph had knowledge about a bunch of stuff prior to. It sounds like the Hebrews were put in position so that all of those livestock and all of those herds that the Egyptians sold for bread went to the Hebrews to take care of.
Yep.
That Pharaoh and Joseph worked it out ahead of time. Hey, we're going to be able to take care of them, and they're going to have work to do.
They're government shepherds, you say?
Yeah, because it says they were. I mean, it says choose a few people that you know that can take care of them, and they'll take care of my flocks and my herds.
Yep. So they got paid.
And you have a question, comment?
Oh, well, this isn't really very theological importance, but, it always says throughout the story of Joseph and the Egyptians and the poor shepherds. Why?
There's a couple of theories on that.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, one has to do with the Hyksos, and the other has to do with one of the gods that the Egyptians worshipped was a lamb god. And I'm sure there's others too.
So maybe they wouldn't approve of shepherding because they worship sheep or something.
Or,
Calves.
or held them in higher regard.
We searched that out one time, even though I've forgotten now what the name of their god was.
Yeah, I think we did. I don't remember that either. But when we're talking about Hyksos, there's a predominant theory in terms of the Pharaoh that arose in of Joseph was basically a new dynasty came upon. Basically, the old dynasty was overthrown, or the old dynasty was a Hyksos, and then it was overthrown by a Egyptian dynasty.
And Hyksos, I think, had the reputation of being shepherd kings.
That's one of the translations. That Josephus said they're shepherd kings. So Hyksos were a foreign ruler, and that's why they're. One theory is they're a foreign ruler. They're of Semitic origin, so they had a predisposition to liking other Semitic peoples, i.e.
They were rulers, not Egyptians.
Get a person.
Oh, I'm sorry, this one's on the Haftorah, I just realized.
Okay,
So,
you can get there.
I got one. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
go ahead.
It's just again, nothing profound either. So at one point, Joseph made the way for Pharaoh to own all the land, all the livestock, all the grain, all the people. In exchange, as part of their slavery, they were given grain, worked the ground for Pharaoh, turned over 20% of the proceeds to Pharaoh, and they kept 80%, or in 1/5. And it says they were slaves. That was their slavedom.
You're
And
saying
we
that the highest
count-
tax rate in the US is higher than that?
Right. If they counted 20% as slavery level back then, what are we
Double indemnity?
to the government?
Sorry, are you
When we
running
pay
for
40 to 80% of ours, depending on where you live.
According to the Constitution, illegally.
But they demand it, we do it, legal or not.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, Pharaoh's army after you.
You know,
Sure.
so they had it better back then, only 20%. That's what it stated.
And he had leeks and garlic.
I'm sorry, I had to get that jab.
I do have
Okay.
one question. I have a few, but I'll just get this one. When he says, I become a father to Pharaoh, is it possible that that Pharaoh was younger than Joseph? Or is that just a term for something?
I'm not sure of a particular Pharaoh that we think this was. I know I've said it down in the past, I don't remember now who exactly think that Pharaoh was based on the timeline from the Exodus videos we've watched with Tim Mahoney.
I thought he said it was Emmett. No?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I would kind of think it's more of it says he became the viceroy. So he was the one who advises Pharaoh as a father would advise his child.
I thought it had something to do with the position he was in. He ruled all of Egypt, aside from the Pharaoh.
Right. He was,
Right, and it was, to the point where he was almost family of the Pharaoh.
he was family, and what's more, he was advisor, because that's
Right.
what catapulted him to that, advising them on what to do with the grain and all that.
This Pharaoh was equal in everything except for overall.
There's also one more thing. I'm sorry, I'm just asking, that's the last one.
Uh-huh.
When it says he would put his hand on his eyes, did that mean that he would heal Jacob's blindness, or is there any traditional meaning for that?
You seen old Western movies where someone dies and they,
Oh, yes.
That was
I don't
the
know,
Lord telling him
but
that he would die.
I just took it that, your son will be there when you die.
That's what I did. Thinks he's hungry.
Yeah, because,
She's still, she's starting.
as far as I know, Jacob never went blind.
Because when he blessed his sons, his eyes were still good. When he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. Remember? So the Haftorah, the two-stick prophecy, as we saw in the video, we've in the past talked about this quite a bit. We comment on it. The two sticks become one again in Yah's hand. It's a key passage of prophetic scripture. It's a prophecy, and it's not yet come to pass. We know this hasn't happened by the explanation of the prophecy given by Yah in the rest of the chapter. And by that we mean that these things, the covenant of peace, for example, have not yet happened, because Antifa exists, so covenant of peace is not here. And that Israel has been scattered, not yet been brought back in. So that fullness of Ezekiel 37 has not yet come to pass. We know that it's a future prophetic, it's a future prophecy that has not yet come to pass. But covenant of peace it was prophecy previously in chapter 34, and we see it again in a little more detail in Isaiah chapter 54. Part of this also is that there will be one king, one nation with one king, and according to our text, the king is David. But in some places in the Aramaic Targumim, the plural of Targum, which of course is the Aramaic translation with commentary on the Tanakh, in some places the Hebrew text says David, but the Aramaic text says Messiah, son of David. We see that in a couple places. For example, I found it in Jeremiah 30 verse 9 and Hosea 4 verse 5. It's not that way in Ezekiel, but in my view, it probably should be interpreted as Messiah, son of David, in order to be consistent with these other texts. That the king would be not David himself, but Messiah, son of David. Of course, could be David, in that David is resurrected and being king in that sense. I think Messiah, son of David would be better, in my understanding, theology, maybe where we're looking at that. Again, those are targums, not necessarily scripture itself, but scripture with commentary, and it's basic commentary in the first century, what they believed would be the understanding of the text, first century or before first century. Sometimes later, depending on the targum. So, any questions on that? Here's some other questions that's going on here. What are they saying to each other? I don't know. Space's question is, Dixie, why aren't you playing with me?
It's like looking like, oh, is that two Dobermans?
Yes, two fierce students coming at us. Run away. All right, so, you have a question?
Okay, yeah, I have a question. Okay, where it says 37:27, and I will set up my sanctuary. It says, my tabernacle also shall be with them.
Yeah, go ahead.
How does that work out with the verse in Revelation, I think, where it says that there'll be no temple?
Well, a few chapters after this, we read about in chapter 40 to 48 of the book of Ezekiel, there outlines a temple in Israel that doesn't match any temple that's been built so far. So it's still, the temple of Ezekiel 40 to 48 is still a prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled. And so I think that this prophecy has to be fulfilled before the no temple prophecy comes to pass. So there's a temple that, and look, if you look in chapter 43 of Ezekiel, 43 verse 7, it says, "He said, human being, this is the place for my throne, the place for the soles of my feet, where I will live among the people of Israel forever. The house of Israel, both they and their kings, will never again defile my holy name by the prostitution, by burying corpses of their kings on their high places, or by placing their threshold next to my threshold, their door frames next to my door frames, and a common wall between me and them. Yes, they defiled my holy name, and by discussing practices they committed, which is why I destroyed them in my anger. So now they should put their prostitution at a distance, and the corpses of their kings far away from me, then I will live among them forever." So this prophecy of this temple is a temple where it says that Yah will dwell with the soles of his feet. And when you read when you look at the dimensions of it, it's not a dimension of either Shlomo's temple or Ezra's temple.
Would you know that verse again?
43:7, Ezekiel 43:7. But really, the last 8 chapters of Ezekiel are talking about this unbuilt temple. And it is a mystery because it is difficult to figure out where it fits in terms of its timeline.
No one gets here, we know it's gonna be mighty big,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
And yes, there will be animal sacrifices in this temple.
Hey, Peter.
Peter will be protesting, but I don't know how much authority they have.
For long.
Because one of the things about this temple says, "No foreigner uncircumcised in both heart and flesh
That's right.
is to enter my sanctuary." No foreigner living among the people of Israel. So, in order to enter this temple, you have to be circumcised in both heart and flesh. And that's from 44, 6 through 8, 9, correction, 6 through 9.
So at the end of 28, where it says forevermore, does that mean like a long, or is it a long, I know, is it like forever evermore, or just as long as there's,
Tell me again,
just the end of that chapter 28, 37, 28?
Let me take a quick look. I didn't bring my interlinear, but I have the text up here.
It says again, 36.
The word is le'olam. But it's not le'olam va'ed.
So it means like as long as there's the earth and.
Well, in terms of how it's listed here in the lexicon, it says long duration, antiquity, futurity. Forever is a common translation for it.
So it wouldn't be a conflict with the new heavens and the earth that has no temple.
Well, we see le'olam. No, I don't think so. So Yochanan chapter 5, a couple things on text notes, textual variants. There are a number of textual variants in John chapter 5. The first one is actually in verse 1, where there's a question as to whether it's a feast of the Judeans, a feast of the Judeans, or the feast of the Judeans or the Jews. Most of the oldest Alexandrian texts, not all, read a feast, as do some of the Byzantine Greek texts. Some Byzantine Greek texts in Aramaic Peshitta read the feast in John 5. And why that is a question or even discussed, the differences, is because the idea that if it's the feast, it's argued that the feast is being referred to as Passover, Pesach. And because the feast is listed as that way, listed as the feast in Luke 22, John 6, 4, 11:55, and 1 Corinthians 5:8. We also see that phrase in Greek, the feast, in John 7:2, where it's speaking of Sukkot. And the argument is that if the text reads a feast, it's probably talking about Shavuot instead of the other two. Which it could make sense in terms of chronologically. If John 6 is talking about Passover, why would John 5 be talking about Shavuot? That would make a lot of sense to me. So, in my view, it could be Passover either way, to be honest, because that in John 7, it's Sukkot, no question. So, if it's Passover in John 6, I'm not sure why it couldn't be Passover in John 5. Because if you're looking at any kind of chronologically, it wouldn't make sense for it to be Shavuot in that sense. But unless it wasn't organized, unless it's not a chronological thing. That's the first interesting difference, that there's a difference in Greek versions versus that. And here's where the words in the Aramaic text, adida or adeda, and then the Greek correction, the Aramaic, Western versus Eastern Aramaic pronunciation of that term. The term in yellow is the highlighted term, adeda or adida. And looking at it, we know that Pesach is in Luke 22 and John 6, Sukkot in John 7, Pesach in John 11, and 1 Corinthians 5:8. Those are the only times this particular phrase in this form is listed there. So it could either be, you can make, in my view, you can make an argument it could be any of the pilgrimage feasts, so it could be any of those. But Pesach seems to be the most likely one to me, even if it is really as a feast. But in the Adeda in the Aramaic has the idea is it's singular in the sense it's the feast, not a feast. So there's also interesting issues with John 5:3b to 5a, and those, I don't know if you're following along with in the Complete Jewish Bible, but it's not listed in the Complete Jewish Bible. It has an asterisk, and then it says the bottom. Well, I read the text in the asterisk part at the bottom as I read. So if someone's reading along with me, I was reading John 5 this afternoon, they would say, "How come he's reading a verse that's not in my Bible?" Well, I did. It's in the bottom of that Bible. But here, the text in green is not in the oldest Alexandrian Greek texts or in the Old Syriac Puritan edition, but it is present in Byzantine texts, in the Aramaic Peshitta, and in the Sinaiticus or Sinai edition of the Old Syriac. So Old Syriac is another Aramaic text that only has the Gospels in it. Some believe it to be older than the Peshitta. Some say it was a translation from the Greek. But there's different versions of that, the Puritan and the Sinai version. So anyway, that's if it is in your Bible, it's because it's using a Byzantine Greek translation, probably, or Greek take as a source text, or maybe it has it in the text notes at the bottom, like the Hebrews Bible does.
So you're saying that Byzantine Greek would have come from the Textus Receptus?
The Textus Receptus is a type of Byzantine text.
Is there any historical proof about the moving of the water at Wesley?
Not that I've seen. I don't know of another source that says it moved. So there's this done with the text though. So any comments on that before we go to some one subject of Shabbat halacha, and the other one is on one of the phrases used. But Shabbat halacha is from the idea of Yeshua saying, "Pick your mat and walk," and they said he shouldn't do it because it's Shabbat and it gets Torah to carry your mat. The argument is, or the reason why the Judeans said that, and he continues on here with this answer made the Judeans more angry because he not only was breaking Shabbat by saying God was his own father, he was claiming the quality of God. So, what the prohibition of carrying burdens on Shabbat comes from Jeremiah 17, verses 21 and 22. So let's turn there and read that, and then read Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 19 through 22. So those are, I think they're parallels more than maybe others do, but in the sense at least talking about the same subject. So we read from the prophet Jeremiah 17, talking about carrying burdens through the city gates. And this, verse 20 and 22 is the primary place it's taken from. It says this: "Here's what Adonai says. If you value your lives, don't carry anything on Shabbat or bring it through the gates of Jerusalem. Don't carry anything out of your houses on Shabbat, and don't do any work. Instead, make Shabbat a holy day. I ordered your ancestors to do this." And what I think is a parallel passage talking about the same kind of thing is Nehemiah 13, verses 19 to 22, that says, let's see, maybe the reference. Okay, so it says, the previous verse says, "Didn't your ancestors do this, and did your God bring all this disaster on us in the city? Yet you are bringing still more fury against Israel by profaning Shabbat. So when the gates of Jerusalem began to grow dark before Shabbat, I ordered that the doors be shut, and I ordered that they not be reopened until after Shabbat. I put some of my servants in charge of the gates to see that no loads be brought in on Shabbat. The merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem once or twice, until I warned them, 'Why are you spending the night by the wall? Don't do it again, and I'll use force against you.' From then on, they stopped coming on Shabbat. Then he ordered the Levi'im to purify themselves and come and guard the gates in order to keep the day of Shabbat holy. My God, remember this too for me, and have mercy on me, keeping with the greatness of your grace." So my view is that the prohibition of carrying on Shabbat is related to carrying things to bring to market on Shabbat. But that said, what was Yeshua's argument for healing the man and then telling him to carry his mallet, or his mat, or his pallet on Shabbat? What was his argument?
God is God of the Sabbath. And carrying your pallet is not a sin.
Well, if you're just going by Jeremiah 17, don't carry things on Shabbat versus the sell it, and he wasn't trying to sell it, then you can see why they would be saying don't do it, right?
You know? Yeah, to a degree.
Well, I think you have to actually go back to Matthew chapter 12 to get the idea of what he's talking about here. So if you go back to Matthew chapter 12, there's also a discussion about Shabbat halacha there. And I think it has bearing on our text in John 5. And if you read through this, they're saying that, haven't you read the Torah, the Shabbat, the Kohanim, he's basically winnowing grain on there. And the verse that he references is in 12:5 and 5 through 7. Haven't you read in the Torah that on Shabbat the Kohanim profane Shabbat yet are blameless? I tell you, in this place something greater than the temple. There is something that's greater than the temple. If you knew what, quote, I want compassion rather than animal sacrifice meant, you would not condemn the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of Shabbat. But in 5:7, what passage is he referencing? He's referencing Hosea 6:6, which is on the screen. For what I desire is chesed, or mercy, not sacrifices, knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. And so, what's going on here with mercy versus sacrifice, knowledge of God more than burnt offerings? It says that chesed is of greater weight than sacrifice, right? But and Yeshua says in 12:5, on Shabbat the Kohanim profane Shabbat and yet are blameless. They're blameless because what? Well, it must mean that sacrifices, the temple service, are of a greater weight than resting on Shabbat.
I guess you could say I never forgot about that cow in the wilderness.
What was that again?
We never thought about the calf, the golden calf, I guess.
Yeah, he never forgot about it. That's why they got sacrifices and evening every day.
So I think in Matthew 12, Yeshua is arguing that the priestly work, including sacrifice, is of a greater weight than resting on Sabbath. You see that really in Hosea 6:6. He also tells them something they already know. It is permitted to rescue a sheep that falls into a pit on Shabbat.
Yeah.
And how much more are humans valuable than sheep? And in green, the text, if this, then how much more that style of argument is known as the Kal v'chomer, the light and the heavy. And it's also known as Hillel's rule number 1 of hermeneutics or scriptural interpretation. Kal v'chomer. If this, then how much more that? So in Matthew 12, Yeshua is arguing that Hosea 6:6 shows that chesed is of greater weight than sacrifices, and since sacrifice is of a greater weight than Shabbat, then chesed is of a greater weight than Shabbat. I think we can use Matthew 12 to help us understand Yochanan 5 as well as other gospel accounts. Yeshua argues that healing Shabbat must be permitted since the following items of lesser weight are permitted. One is watering animals on Shabbat, Luke 3. It's okay to rescue an animal from a pit on Shabbat. We saw that in Matthew 12. It's also in Luke 14. And we know from John chapter 7 that circumcision on the 8th day is done even if it is Shabbat. And he's telling that's something they already know. All three of these things are not Yeshua-isms in the sense that he's telling them this for the first time, but they already know it's part of standard halakha. For traditional Judaism at the time, although it would not be standard halakha, of course, for Qumran group, they would not rescue a drowning. They would not rescue an animal from a pit, nor save a drowning man with a ladder, because they will not use a tool on Shabbat. Not Shabbat circumcision. But so he's telling them things they already know. So healing good and good deeds are permitted on Shabbat if it is at least of a weight of a great of weight as halachic weight rather as watering an animal, rescuing an animal from a pit, or for circumcision. So illnesses that were specifically talked about in the gospel texts are the withered hand, the blindness and lameness, and issue of blood. We see the lameness in our reading this week in John 5. Kind of in a commentary there, by making clay on Sabbath, in John chapter 9, Yochanan 9, heal the blind man, Yeshua instructed us that matters of at least as low of a halakhic weight as making clay, i.e. building and kneading, on Shabbat Shabbat may be loosed to heal or for good deeds. To make, if you have to make clay to heal someone, it is a greater weight than Shabbat. Okay, so what is all this saying? What is Yeshua's argument then for the blind or the lame man telling him to carry his mat? Well, one thing, of course, is that we know that healing is of a greater weight than Shabbat. And even if you look at it in traditional Jewish texts, saving a life is of a greater weight than Shabbat, so therefore it's the same kind of thing. But what about carrying the mat?
It's his man, how's he gonna get it on? He wasn't carrying a mat to sell anything, he was just there.
So I think you look at it two ways. One is that
Actually,
Yeah.
it didn't even beat or it didn't even go against the Jeremiah, because he'd been sick for how many years? He'd been by that pool almost the entire time. That was where he was living. He wasn't taking it out of his house. Jeremiah said, don't take anything out of your house and carry it. He was carrying it to his house.
well, yeah, it could be. I mean, he certainly would be might ruffle some feathers, so to speak, because it's still carrying something.
Yeah.
But it might be as a witness as well. I mean, people may not know who he was. He's carrying a mat because he's been laying on it for X number of years. They know something's different. They know he was healed. It could be a testimony to his witness, or a witness of his testimony, rather. That was the case. We don't really know why I told him to do it, but I don't think that Yeshua's idea of that isn't that I think that Shabbat is broken by it. Rather, I think that it's a testimony to his witness. And in my view, it wouldn't make Shabbat anyway because he's not taking it to market. There's also a question, equality with Elohim comes from this passage from 5:18. And they said, they're all saying that God was his own father who's claiming equality with God. In the Greek text, it's the word isos in the form of ison. And just as a math reference, you can recognize that word used as the isos of isosceles or isosceles. It means equal leg is how isosceles means. So isos means equal in that context of a triangle. In the Peshitta Aramaic text, it's the word shavah, the Hebrew cognate of shavah, which means to equal, agree, or be worthy or proper. So you can look that up in Strong's as 7737, or in the Chaldean, as it says, the CH, Chaldean Hebrew, or the Aramaic is 7739. That's where that word is used in the Aramaic text. So equality is a good translation for it. Right. Still a challenge today, at the end of our passage in John 5. The text reads, "But don't think that it is I who will be your accuser before the Father. Do you know who will accuse you? Moshe, the very one who you counted on. For if you really believe Moshe, you would believe me, because it was about me that he wrote. But if you don't believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say?" So his argument against them is they don't even believe Moshe. I think we have the opposite challenge today, in that for the vast majority of Christians, how can you believe Yeshua but not Moshe, who wrote about him? So it's kind of the Yeshua's phraseology is talking to people who say they believe in Moshe. If we talk to people who believe in Yeshua but not Moshe, it's the same sort of thing, but just to counter that. And that is all I have for our study. What are your questions? Don't sleep when you're driving on the way home. That's what that's supposed to be about. Or the audience is now asleep. No? Let's get stuff to happen.
I see Spacey, but I haven't figured out Dixie yet.
Well, it's Dixie's paw. You see Dixie's paw? has her paw over her eyes.
Her dad?
Yeah, but it's the
Is it
other,
a toy back there? I think it's a
oh,
toy.
is it a
That's her
toy?
paw, that's her head.
Yeah, that part I got.
Okay.
It's that toy.
That's behind. It's baked.
That's lamb chop.
Yeah.
Stuffed toy?
Okay, lamb chop, sorry. Didn't know it.
So if you're about to go, get ready to the bar, so I'm looking for your name.